Dear producers, let me introduce to you Steve Levitan and Norman Lear.
Oh, oh, we'll go this way. We're gonna. Whoop. Let me help you up now.
Thank you. Whoa! Jeez.
Welcome, everyone, to my continuing quest to associate myself with Norman Lear in any way I can. I will do anything. It's a pleasure, always. This is my whole life is surreal, but one of the more surreal moments was when I went to my daughter's high school class and I looked over at one of the other parents and it was Norman. So we got to know each other that way through school. I've said it before, but I call him my friend from high school. And, it's a pleasure, as always. I don't know, you want to just jump right in?
I have to say, to get it off my mind, I'm sorry I tried the 2 steps.
We have regrets.
I've discharged that now.
Okay.
I won't think that.
Okay, good. Good. Well, let's.
You know.
Can I jump into a subject
Please.
that I'm fascinated with, and then we'll work forwards and we'll work backwards and we'll jump all around. But one of the things that amazes me is just the idea that you had all these shows going on at one time. It's something that I wrestle with now of if I don't put all my efforts into one, what happens to that one? And I just want to know, what was that like? And let's start from here you have, and I also want to go back and talk about the beginnings of things, but here you have All in the Family, it's on fire. What is your role specifically on that show? What were you doing first season, second season, and then when did Maud come about, and how did that all go, and what was your day-to-day life like?
I was everywhere with All in the Family. I wrote a great deal. Had some magnificent help, but I rewrote a great deal. And I bet the best way of saying that is I was one of the writers. Mm-hmm. You know, we happened to go the way I wished to go because it was my show I created, but I was one of the writers. And when Maud came along, let me leap ahead and say, some years later there were 7 or 8 shows, or there were 7 shows on the air and 8 and 9 coming along, and I became concerned about the religious right, and I wanted to start what became People for the American Way. I didn't want to start an organization, I just wanted to do something on television about it. And so I looked for somebody to replace me. And I went to my friends, to Larry Gilbart, to Carl Reiner, to, you know, numbers of friends.
Good friends.
And in the company, Charlie Houck and Rod Parker and so forth. And the guys that weren't in the company came and looked and said, "Are you out of your mind? I can't do this. I mean, take over 6, 7 shows." And I realized that had I been in the same circumstance, I couldn't do it either. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the soil. You know, we had 1 show, we had 2 shows. The weather insisted I grow another arm, I grew another arm, I grew a half a brain, I grew, they needed a broom to sweep up, I grew one up my ass. And that's the way it came about. It didn't happen. And so I realized I needed a great executive.
Mm-hmm.
And he was working in the company. He was a young guy by the name of Alan Horn. He's now the guy who runs Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in and he took over as an executive who got along with writers, and everybody cared.
Was there a period there where you were spending 2 hours on this show, 2 hours on that show, jumping around? Were you meeting with writers?
I had an office and a large conference table. Writers came in on one show, sat around the table. We had a microphone in the middle of the table. We talked about story. And that's Jack Warner. He's finished. And I was at this studio once, made a film called Never Too Late Here. I was invited to dine in the executive dining room at this big table. Madam Chiang Kai-shek, who was the wife of the man who ran China, was visiting one day. Mr. Warren, we were all sitting around in shirts and ties with Madam Chiang Kai-shek. And Jack Warner, whose sense of humor was beyond, walked in, came down this line, said hello to everybody, and then jokingly asked when his shirts would be ready. I didn't know there were that many people who would remember Chinese laundries.
Different time.
I'm sorry, I lost.
No, that's good. We like those diversions. So you would people would rotate in from those different shows throughout the day, and you would jump around for a period.
Oh, we'd sit, the microphone in the middle of the conference table, and somebody would be typing down the hall, so that when the meeting was over, there were already half a dozen pages of notes, and the rest would be coming. So the writers went to work. Then another group of writers came in, and that went on through the day until I had to get to a rehearsal.
Wow, that's amazing. Another thing that that really interests me these days is the fact of how fragile pilots are, and that razor-thin line between what works and what doesn't. And so there were 3 versions of All in the Family before, or 2 before you got it right?
No. It was 100% the same script and the same leads, Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton.
Right.
And I made it 3 times with 3 different young people. Rob Reiner was available the first time, but too young, I thought. Mm-hmm. I knew him since he's 8 years old. So.
Right.
He was too young, I thought, at the time. And I consider it the greatest piece of good fortune that it took 3 times out. Same script, I repeat, but then I had the Mike and Gloria that really worked.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and it makes me wonder all the time about how many good projects probably get left behind. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, for example, Big Bang Theory was such a monster hit, and it was shot and then redeveloped, and how little of that there is, because what were you feeling, or were you happy after the first one, or did you know something was not quite right, or was it the network that just said, would you have gone with the first version if they had said yes?
Oh yeah, I would have, but I was spared.
Yeah.
I'm glad they said no, and when they said no, they roared, they laughed. I mean, I was there, but they were afraid to put it on, just wouldn't put it on. But this was ABC, they wouldn't give it up either. So they had an extension. They held it for a year, then they could force me to make it again or put it on the air. And they forced me to make it again. The third year, along came CBS and said, no, this was Bob Wood. They changed leadership. And what had preceded All in the Family at CBS then was were the Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, and another show where perhaps the greatest problem the family faced was that the roast was ruined and the boss was coming to dinner. And they were funny shows, but you know, there were no problems in America. There was no families had no economic problems, no health problems. They used to talk about messages we were sending until I realized that wall to wall, floor to ceiling, if that wasn't a message, look at America. We have no problems at all. No racial problems, no economic problems, no health problems, nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, why do you think you were the one that broke through that
Just
way?
lucky, I guess.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, what is it? I mean, I know you served in the military, and you lived a real life. I always say, well, we're the most untested generation of all time. Our big accomplishment and amongst my peers is were we able to sit through Saving Private Ryan, but and then you have people who were real heroes and lived real lives. I mean, did that was that a factor in?
You're living real lives. Come on.
Well, but I mean, you were. It was a different time. It
was a different time, and I don't think we did so well with it. It was an amazing experience to be part of a generation that had nothing. We were not at all ready to go to war, and it was the biggest of all wars, and we did it. The Riveters came alive. Everybody did their part. It was fabulous, and we won the war, and we embraced the Marshall Plan and helped Europe get on its feet again. But then we developed one problem. We started to take ourselves too seriously. So back to the beginning of this conversation. We started to take ourselves too seriously, and we bought into the bullshit that we're, God's chosen, and America is, and America wished to be all of that, and was on its way to being all of that, and maybe all of that is not attainable. We're human beings, so we have to live with our imperfections and overcome them. But I'm probably off again.
No, but it's good. I mean, I look back at it, and I mean, I very much remember when those shows came on, and how shocking it was for people. But what gave you the audacity to do that? What made you?
Honest to God, honest to God, there was no audacity involved at all. I'm a serious man. I was a serious kid. I had reason to be serious. It was a difficult life. And I was a serious kid, but early on, the foolishness of the human condition was very clear to me, early on. Mm-hmm. When, as a 9-year-old, my father is in deep trouble. The depression is, and he goes away for several years, and some fatuous fool is standing over me, a grown-up, telling me, well, you're the man of the house now. Then and there, I kind of understood the foolishness of the human condition. What the hell is he saying to me? And the next words are, there, a little boy doesn't cry. I mean, a man of the house doesn't cry. And so I came to work. I didn't think, I knew There was nothing Archie was going to say that couldn't be heard in a high school auditorium or in the schoolyard. It was the language of our time, and my instruction to writers was to read a couple of newspapers, pay attention to your kids and your wife and everything that's going on between you, and all. And the grist for our mill was like yours. What's going on in our world? You deal with what's going on in the world, and not ignore it in order to write about Mom dented the fender and how are we going to tell Dad?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that always impresses me so much about you is that you seem so unwavering in the face of any pushback. And I imagine the pushback must have been pretty fierce at times. I mean, was there a time, did you ever stop and secretly go, oh my God, what have we done? Or were you ever frightened by it at all? Or you just felt, I mean, you seem so sure and consistent and, facing some real, some scary folks at times.
I was never doing anything I thought was going to make a state secede from the Union. Mm-hmm. Never, On the very opening show of All in the Family, I wanted to show 360 degrees of Archie Bunker. I used to say, we can't get wetter than wet. I intended this script to show 360 degrees of him. We're going to jump in the pool and get wet. And that's why I refused to do another script or change. Before we were going to go on the air, Bob Wood's big solution to a problem they had in the first script was, you know what? By then we had made 4 shows. We'll run the second one first, and then we'll run the first one. And the big line that was a bone of contention was, because I wanted to show Archie all of his colors, the plot was very, very simple. It was an anniversary. Mm-hmm. They were coming back from church, and the kids were making a brunch for them. So the kids were fooling with the brunch. They were off stage at church, and Mike realizes he's alone. I'm sorry about this group over here. And Mike realizes they've got time alone in the house, and they never have time alone in the house. He kisses her, tries to get Gloria upstairs, takes a moment, but he gets it. They go upstairs, and of course, as soon as they're clear, the front door opens. Archie and Edith. Archie hated the sermon, so they left the church early, and they're home earlier than expected. They hear the slam of the door, and they come down. They're buttoning their clothes, and Archie says, 11 o'clock of a Sunday morning. They had to have that line out. Why? Because it makes it so graphic. What do you mean it makes it? He says 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. You know what they're doing. I said, yeah, of course I know what they're doing. But A, they're married. B, he hasn't said anything seriously, except that was the bone of contention. I didn't know that show was going on the air and that I would be back at work Monday morning when I was driving home to see the show on the air. It was on the air 3 hours earlier in New York.
Wow. And so the show, I mean, it comes along. At first, it's both loved by critics, and some people didn't quite get it.
Some hated it.
And like so many great shows, it started slow, and then the audience sort of caught up with it, right?
What happened was, mercifully, we went on mid-season. January 16th was our start date. So when we were ending our season, and there were 3 networks, so ABC and NBC were going off the air. Not going off the air, going to reruns. we had 2 shows that lasted longer than they did. So those people devoted to the other 2 networks found us, and we started to tick up. And then Johnny Carson saw us, and he suggested that we do a blind opening for the Emmys. That the blind opening, meaning before the credits, the bunkers are going to sit down to watch. This family that most of America had not seen are going to sit down to watch the Emmys. And then the Emmys would start. And that gave us a huge boost. So the ratings started to tick up, and the network picked it up at the last minute.
Right, and then it just took off from there. So what I want to know was, now you're the jump forward a little bit, and now you're the king. And it's in the 70s. You have 4 shows on at this point. You are controlling Saturday night. What was that like? What was just paint a picture of what that town was like, what the business was like back then, and what you felt like. Did you feel like you just had power to do whatever you want and the world was your oyster, or did you?
I couldn't answer the question to anybody who would understand it better. We were working on next week's script, and by then 3 scripts. There's nothing like that. You have no time for anything else. I didn't have any time to sit around and think about what we were doing in a grand sense. We had a show to do here, and a rehearsal there, and an actor to please here, and a fight going on there. I mean, it was not easy dealing with Carroll O'Connor, whose feet I kiss for what he brought to it. But it was difficult. I mean,
well, talk about that. So because that's a huge part of being a producer, is both recognizing that talent and knowing that you may have to put up with something to take full advantage of it. So what were the challenges there, and how did you learn? What was your style in dealing with people like that?
Well, my style developed. I don't know that I started. So I know that. Here's my history with Carroll O'Connor. I came out to California I was based in New York at the time. I came out to California to read a half a dozen actors, among them Mickey Rooney. Carroll O'Connor came in, sat down, read a page for me, and that was it. I mean, that was it. It's so interesting, you write your character, and then the actor comes in, and he's delivered half of what you wanted. It's not yours anymore; it's ours, and that was it was his Archie, and I said, "What are you doing?" He was imitating a cab driver that he knew in New York, and that was his Archie. And I said, "You got it. I want you." And he said,
"That's a bad negotiating tactic, by
the way." He knocked me out. And but he asked if, and this is where he was, if he could come back. How long was I going to be here? I said 4 days. He said, "Can I come back in a few days? I'll give you a call." I said, "Yes." He came in, he said he'd worked on the script. And we read a few pages. And I guess that's when I mean, to the extent there was a me that was the answer to the question you raised, I said, "Carroll, I'm going to write the scripts. I don't want to talk about why I think what you've done is less than what we have. If you can't do this, you can't do this. But I want you to do it." Anyway, and that's how we started our relationship. He came to work, and every single script we went over some kind of
So that was
And sometimes his questions made for a better script, and sometimes he refused to do something that I knew he should be doing.
And that was the ongoing process from that point forward.
From that point on.
And you know, again, how delicate these things, how fragile casts are. I mean, what Jean Stapleton brought, and how she defined Archie, and how she made that world accessible to people. Was that instant too? You knew right away?
Oh, yes, I had the same experience with her when she read. Same experience. We'd been on the air just a few weeks when people would ask me, what's Jean Stapleton like? And I remember the first time I said, she's always where she is. And then realized, holy shit, she's always where she is. What a statement that is. What a strong statement it is. Because as the father at that time of 3 kids, I'm not sure I knew it then, that I wasn't always where I was.
Right.
But I'd like to have been always where I was, the way she was.
Yeah, that's something we could all benefit from. So I'm sure that subject, that thought crossed your mind a lot recently when you've been writing your memoir, which you just finished.
Yes.
It's
October 13.
What was that like for you to do that? There's so much to cover in a life like yours.
Yes.
And what were the fun parts? What were the difficult parts?
Well, it was all difficult. But it was difficult, you know, it's hard to be a human being. I learned that like I never understood it before, you know. But it is, I don't care what the circumstances of our birth are, it's hard to be a human being. But, you know, they make video games hard so that there's some excitement in beating it. And if we could only look at life that way, it's hard, but it's as good or better than any video game. And we got to learn how to use it.
Tell a story about, was it the Lincoln Center honors with your mom?
No, I think if it's the same story.
Yeah,
I got well, he knows my mother. I got a call from John Mitchell, was the first president of the Academy, Television Academy Hall of Fame. And he called, we were great friends, and he called me about 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and he said, Norman, we've decided to start a Hall of Fame. And these are going to be the first 7 inductees. We're going to do 7 a year. William Paley, who started CBS, David General Sarnoff, who was the guy who invented NBC, Edward R. Murrow, the greatest of the newscasters, Patty Chayefsky, I think the best writer that ever came out of television, Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and you. Holy. Called my mother immediately in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I said, Mom, listen, I just got this call. They're going to start a television Hall of Fame, and these are the people. And I mentioned the people, and she said, listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I to say?
So maybe that's why life is hard sometimes.
Didn't make it easy.
But I mean that you know, that outlook sets one up for a life in comedy, doesn't it?
It did with me.
But you know, when you're writing these chapters, and you know, oh my God, so you started with Martin and Lewis professionally. What was that like? I mean, what is Jerry as kooky as he seems? What was that whole
Well,
world like?
I started with the Jack Haley show.
Okay.
Jack Haley, Ford Star Review. Jerry saw the very first show. He saw one sketch that he thought he would do and could do a great deal better. I want those writers. So that's how we got to the Colgate Comedy Hour very quickly after the Jack Haley show. And the Colgate Comedy Hour was rotating comics. We were on every 4 weeks. And it's interesting. The very first sketch of the very first Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis Colgate Comedy Hour had a point of view. It was a time when television was just bursting, and the motion picture industry was afraid that people were going to be turning to television and not go to their films. And they had a huge campaign going called Movies Are Better Than Ever. Every theater around the country carried the sign, Movies Are Better Than Ever. It was huge. All the studios contributing to this campaign. So our opening sketch saw Dean managing a theater. Marilyn Maxwell, if you remember the name, was a beautiful woman, a singer at the time. She was a guest on the show, and she was playing a vamp that the theater had on the street, trying to vamp guys into the theater because the motion picture theater was empty. Dean was trying to do it his way, and Jerry came along bouncing a ball. I was trying to do him. And she was vamping it, he wouldn't go in, he had to go home, he's going to watch a television show. And Dean is going crazy, and they finally get him inside, and the noise drives him crazy, anyway, it was a diatribe against the motion picture industry that couldn't see some progress being made in entertainment in another direction. They were fighting it as if they couldn't exist with television. And Dean and Jerry, especially Jerry, carried on in his way, and 90% of the laughter was all about Jerry's behavior and not the sketch. So I was crying into my Chinese food with my agent and his wife after the show, and the agent was saying, "You're out of your mind. That's all they're going to be talking about tomorrow is how funny the show is." But several days later, the motion picture industry was in deep distress and anger, and they caused, through Hal Wallace, their motion picture producer, them to apologize in a full-page ad in Daily Variety to the motion picture industry. So our long way of saying the point of view of the sketch held despite Jerry's clowning around. We'd made our point.
And again, you were, as I said before, nothing but consistent.
I had a point of view. Yes, I was serious.
And then, so now you're looking back and you're writing this memoir. What was the happiest part of your time of your life?
Every day that I was writing the memoir, until recently when they became freshmen in college, I was waking up to see my twin daughters, and the woman I love. So how hard is that? I mean, it was great. I'm one of these people who goes to sleep thinking of the taste of coffee the next morning. I like that too. And I really like getting up in the morning. Waking up, here's the best piece of philosophy I ever heard. A man, probably it sounds Talmudic. A man should have a garment with 2 pockets. In the first pocket should be a piece of paper on which is written, "I am but dust and ashes. I am the proverbial grain of sand on the beach of life." And in the second pocket, a piece of paper on which is written, "For me, the world was created." So I wake up this morning, and what are all you people doing here? You are here for me. You know? And I was born 91 years ago, July 27th, 1922, for you. There's no other reason. I couldn't believe anything more. There's no other reason for my existence than to be here for each of you. And isn't that a great way to look at it?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, well, and I think it's why so many people who in the business today, you know, some of the people doing some of the most outrageous work, you know, Trey Parker and Judd Apatow and, you know, to name Phil Rosenthal, you know, I know people, you know, are the group of those who follow you around. I mean, why, what do you love on TV and in movies right now? What are you excited about? What makes you happy?
Well, you mentioned, I mean, the Book of Mormon. Have you all seen the Book of Mormon? The Book of Mormon is one of the great gifts of sanity.
Yeah.
I mean, I love those guys. And you. My God.
No.
Modern. But what about Modern Family? I mean,
I want to hear more about me.
Well, how
No.
serious and glorious is that show? I mean, how much it has meant to so many people, to the whole culture. I'll go on.
No. Who were the people that just, you know, when you look back at all the actors you worked with and writers, who were the funniest? Who were the people that you go, these were the 2 or 3 funniest people I ever got to spend time with?
Well, the funniest, the person who made me laugh in places in my body I didn't know existed was B. Arthur. Maud. She, the woman, had an understanding of the foolishness of the human condition. I love the expression. On and off stage, she was mad, and I use the word lovingly. I mean, she was mad. Whose title was It's a Mad, 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 Mad World? Anyway, she got to me. They all made me, I mean, for different reasons. There were an awful lot of funny people.
I heard a B. Arthur story.
Yes?
That sticks with me, which is when she was filming Golden Girls, right when they got to the last scene, you know, the drinks would come out for the, you know, they would just, all the ladies would pour themselves a cocktail, and it would just sort of be the way to ease out of the night. And then she would, you know, go in and get changed, and she would just take her, you know, the cocktail with her and put it in her car and drive home. And someone came up to her and said, you know, B, that's probably not a really good idea for you to drive home like that. And she said, why not? And he said, well, you know, the police see you with this, you're going to get into trouble. And so the next day she came in with a higher car. Anyone else come to mind?
They all come to mind. Jean Stapleton was a glorious woman and actress. When I had cast her, and just before she left, I said, you know, in the opening show, I want to do something that I saw my Aunt Rose. I was a little guy. My Aunt Rose got up early in the morning. I was already up, and she came to the refrigerator, and she opened the refrigerator and moved down. She was in her nightgown and a chemise, and she was going to a low draw, and a breast fell out, and she tucked it in quickly. And we talked, and she left. She was going back to, she and her husband had a small theater in Pennsylvania. So she was at Penn Station, and she called, hoping I was still at Marion Doherty's casting place. And I was, and she said, you know, I've been thinking about it. If you have to have an actress that can do that, I just don't think I can do that. Please forget it, please. I want you to play the part. We'll find another time to tuck away a breast.
So when you look back, you know, on your career, what were the differences? What's the difference between the successes and the failures? When you look, you know, because I always think it can be the tiniest decision that you make. You know, I always say that in mounting a project, you have to make about 10,000 decisions. You know, every character, tone, this, and then you can make all of them right, but one, and you're sunk.
Well, I did a show called 704 Hauser. That was the Archie Bunker Address, and in the same set. And this was sometime later, after the Bunkers had been out for a number of years, but that was the address. And living there was a black family raising a son in the image, the father, John Amos, thought in the image of Thurgood Marshall. And instead, the kid was growing up to be Clarence Thomas. The father wanted a liberal, and he was getting a conservative. And the young conservative had a girlfriend, and she was Jewish. It was a lot to swallow. Mm-hmm. And it would have been enough to have the father disappointed in the boy and still struggling to make him Thurgood Marshall instead of Clarence Thomas, and bring a girlfriend in later. Mm-hmm. But moved too fast. So in the first show, and he was not a black guy cast to be a black guy that wasn't as black as he was a black guy. Mm-hmm. And she was a very white girl. And they were very smoochy. And it was terrific. It was really terrific. But it was a lot to do one, you know, the impact of it was too much for one show, and the network wasn't ready. Mm-hmm. I wish I had gone along a little slower, because the cast was wonderful, and I think we could have made it work.
So maybe if you look back and you say, maybe if we had just let them come to know the family a bit
Yes.
more, ease them in, then you could have gone further.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I did the same thing with Mary Hartman. When Mary Hartman, it died its own death, I mean, after 2 years. But we did a show called All That Glitters. And we reversed Genesis, where man was made from the rib of woman. Just turned it all around. And it was a corporation, and the women were running everything and looking at the cute little behinds of the boys that worked there. It was all of that. And it was fabulous. And we followed each of 4 women in their homes and what their home life was like. But we did it, again, moving too fast. One of the storylines was the Marlboro woman. And the Marlboro woman was really a guy who was pretending to be a beautiful woman, and cast Linda Gray in that role. If you remember Linda Gray, she was so gorgeous. And again, just too fast, too fast.
With Mary Hartman, that you made a decision that you didn't go the traditional route of network television. That was made by you for syndication only, straight to syndication.
Well, no, we tried to sell it to a network. Nobody would go near it.
And so then you just, was that one of the first shows to do what you did at that point?
It was, yeah. What we did was we made 2 episodes because nobody would make it, and then tried to sell it. We had a very difficult time selling it. When we finally sold it, we sold it to independent stations and a few affiliates, network affiliates. But they were small stations in cities, and they became, because Mary Hartman worked, and it became, you know, it was Time Magazine, it was that kind of a hit.
Mm-hmm.
Any station that carried it became the Mary Hartman Network. It kind of evolved. So there was a Mary Hartman Network consisting of independent stations that simply had bought Mary Hartman.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we're going to open it up for questions for you guys, but one last one from me, which would just be, what advice do you give people? I'm sure people come to you all the time for advice in getting into this business or getting traction in this business. What do you say to them?
I think probably, not because I think this is the biggest best piece of advice in the world, although I like it, but it's the one that I've heard myself giving more often than any other, and that is work at what you want to do, and don't. I've forever told people, don't worry about being a pain in the ass. Don't wait for anybody to make the phone call or wait for the phone call. Make the phone call yourself. Get to the casting director or the people you want to work for or whatever. Don't worry about being a pain in the ass. You're a nice person. Show up, get there. The same thing with a script. Don't tell me you can't get it read. If you have to carry it there yourself every day and for a month, somebody is going to say, because it happened to me all the time. So the people who worked for me knew that if I might be interested in somebody that came to the desk just because they were interesting.
Good advice. I'm really bad at picking people. We've got some microphones and we're going to run people around Phil Donahue style, apparently. There's an old reference. Okay, that's an super enthusiastic hand.
Thank you. Boy, you so many different questions I'm sure people want to ask. It's just an honor to have you here, Mr. Lear, so thank you. Phenomenal.
Thank you.
I grew up watching your shows, and of course my kids.
So did I.
Thank you. Princess Bride, phenomenal, right? Everybody? I mean.
Oh, yeah.
And it's nice to see the pairing between you and Steve, because I also grew up watching Steve's shows. And as a family man, I look at these shows and they really give me a lot of thoughts about boundaries. You grew up in a time that you had boundaries, and when you said that line about the waking up at 11, at 11 o'clock in the morning, that line to me was the gift that you were giving of intelligence to the viewers. Today, we may have an uncontrollable Wild West with no boundaries, and someone once told me that All in the Family was the reason why cable television came into its place. You broke a sound barrier. What can you tell me today, or what would you tell us in advice? Would you be working in this today's medium, and what might you be working on in this uncontrollable boundary where sex, violence, language in cable television, maybe not in the network television? In last bit is I was at yesterday's meeting, and one important filmmaker said, the rating systems is shit. We don't need it. The ratings, we live in an R-rated world. So we're living in an R-rated world. I don't think you might have been, but at least when I was growing up, I wasn't. So tell me, as filmmakers, what our responsibilities are for boundaries.
And good night, everybody.
Didn't you say what you wanted to say? Boundaries. I don't.
What would you do today? What show? Is there a show? I don't mean to hijack your question.
There's a Brent Miller sitting here that we worked together, young fellow. We drove in together this morning. And I said to him, as we were driving, you know, I see this would be an interesting opening of a show. A fellow was on his iPhone. You see him working on a close-up like crazy, and he's in the middle of a rectal exam. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
So
Look for Phil Dunphy to do that soon. Thank you. Thank you for that, Norman. Okay, well, I'm going to move around. So how about you, sir? And then we'll...
Much quicker question. First of all, it's an honor and privilege, Mr. Lear, for you to share your time with us today. Question is, with the network, is there one particular show that the network censors, the network executives said no? Could you share that with us and what it was? What particular? Because you did push the boundaries, and we're so thankful. Many laughs. But if you would, please share.
No, the only show that it's happening right now. It's maybe 3 years now since I wrote a show about generations past 55 and 60. 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, retirement village. And nobody wants, ask me the title. The title is Guess Who Died?
What was it?
Guess Who Died? Yeah. So I have not been able to, I think it's as funny as anything I've ever done. I know it would work. And, but one, Mary White, God bless her, covers the whole demographic for 175 stations or networks, or Betty White. One Betty White seems to cover it. They won't touch the demographic.
And what, was there anything, like a particular issue, moment, or something on, you know, one of the other shows, the All in the Family's mods, that whole time, that you couldn't do?
No, there's nothing, nobody ever said you can't do it. I mean, there were shows that but not what you're asking. No, nobody ever said, we won't touch that subject.
Okay. How about you, ma'am? Yes?
First of all, just what an honor and privilege to see the two of you representing two generations in one place on this stage, and masters of comedy. Bravo, bravo. I have a question. It's kind of a two-part question. Two things I always so admired about all your work, Mr. Lear, is that you brought strong women to the forefront, way ahead of the curve. You're way ahead of the curve. You're bringing us strong women. And the other thing you did with such mastery was you burst the bubble of pomposity in egotistical windbags, whether they were black or white, whatever their race or ethnicity, whether it was Mr. Jefferson or whether it was Archie Bunker. Who were your inspirations for some of the really strong women characters, and were there inspirations for those pompous windbags on the male side of the gender issue?
Yeah, my dad was a pompous windbag. He was somebody who could sell shit on a stick for lollipops. That was his expression. And that was his expression, and he was going to have $1 million in 10 days to 2 weeks, tops. That was his expression. And I did a pilot called Pop with Charlie Durning playing my dad.
Oh, wow.
And moved too fast too. Didn't work.
And
There was-
females.
You know, I wonder if you find this true too, Steve. On virtually every show we did, the glue that held it together, some people have taken this as racist, sexist, have been women.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean it because they were paid to be moms or nannies. I mean it because they were the grown-ups. They held together disparate talents and personalities and so forth. On virtually all the shows, women were...
Do you mean behind the scenes or the characters of the women?
No, I mean the associate producers.
Oh.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
there was such strength there. And we had very important women holding down key jobs in the company too. There was a Virginia Carter who came from the aerospace industry, and who, you know, there are things of her devising passing in space now. But she came in to help with women to make sure that we were on the right track with women in the middle of the women's movement and everything. And she grew into a position where she produced 8, 10 afternoon specials. Remember the afternoon specials of the networks?
Sure.
These were serious dramas for kids after school.
Okay, how about you? Yes, you. I'm just not comfortable in this position.
It's an honor, of course. I did want to ask you, Mr. Lear, what is your opinion about this climate where all of these celebrities and the like are constantly sticking their foots in their mouth and then going on all of these...
What?
Constantly putting their foot in their mouth, making these offensive remarks, for lack of a better description, and then going on all the media outlets and apologizing. And could you possibly have seen that happening in the day when you were producing those sort of issues?
Well, I think it's something that always happened, but now, as I said, with 147 networks, that's not an actual figure. There may be 3,000. But with all the outlets, there's more room for making stupid statements. But the phenomenon always existed.
Okay, how about you, sir?
I just think one of the great things you did for our country, you shined a light on issues in a way and served it up that people could accept it, and they laughed about it, but you got them talking about it. My question to you is, what are we missing today that we should be looking at, and what are we talking too much about today?
Well, we're talking too much about celebrity. You know, it has fascinated me that the entire century, the last century, was defined by Andy Warhol. And it has, of course, bled over into this century, and it threatens to define this century too, that everybody will have their 15 minutes. And the kid the other day who shot 6 women, or whatever the hell it was, sometimes I wonder how much the need to be seen and heard has motivated these young people who are shooting it around the country. Too much emphasis on celebrity, on what it means to have your face in the paper. That's a big subject. I could go on and on, but it hurts. It hurts the culture a great deal, and minimizes it.
You, sir? Yeah, please.
First, I want to thank you for the masterpiece that is Fernwood Tonight and America Tonight. They're long overdue for home video release. I hope that's a possibility. Seinfeld was a show that changed the stylistic map for multi-camera sitcoms in terms of used to be 3 scenes, 4 scenes, then it became 25 scenes. Some, I believe some All in the Family episodes might have been even 2 scenes. There was a theatricality about that. I'm wondering what your feelings are, whether that could ever return, or whether is this something that we've lost in terms of television comedy?
I think it could return. I think they'd be just as successful today as they were then. As a matter of fact, I have suggested to the talk shows, this was 3 years ago, why not live with or think about, Fernwood Tonight never went off the air. In Fernwood, it's still on the air. It's a local talk show. And since it's been there all this time, and the guys say, my God, why not cut to them some evening and see what they're doing and try it? And I don't understand why I haven't had a taker. But those guys are just as funny today. I've seen them together. They can't help being funny together.
I think if you look at shows like Raymond, which is fairly recent, I mean, that was very much in the style of,
yes,
long, and that, to me, when you look at a Raymond today, I don't think it looks dated at all, because what they're talking about, again, it's all characters, and you're talking about something that's relatable. And so the form, when done really well, the form disappears, and you're left with the characters. And so I think it's about the very difficult task of nailing those characters and getting that right. And then and you won't even notice that you're watching 2 scenes, I hope.
Can I pick a hand?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please. Oh, God, yes.
Can I pick a
Thank
hand?
you.
Thank you. Somebody who has a question for Steve.
Oh.
Over there. Sir.
A lot of the comedies you've done have been really funny and clever, but they've also tackled really important issues, whether they're social, political, or personal. So why is comedy so effective at addressing these issues and starting a dialogue in that realm?
I feel like that was still for Norman. Well, I mean, I'll I don't even really feel silly. No, look at with Modern Family, for example, the show, when we came up with the idea of let's show modern family life, even though we thought it would marginalize our audience, we thought, well, there goes the red states. Let's show a gay family. It's how do you do a show about what's changing in American life without showing a gay family? And we were very, very pleasantly surprised that, and it's a testament to Eric Stonestreet and Jesse Tyler Ferguson and their charm and the humanity they bring to it, and of course to our amazing writing staff. But that when you show people, it goes back to my news days. There's a you want to say something, you want to make a statement. Let's just say you do, and you talk about the number of people that were affected by this budget cut. And you say 10,000 people are affected, and it just rolls over people. But if you zero in on one family and you show how they're struggling and what it means to that family, suddenly you connect with the audience. And I think that that's what you do if you stay true to the characters and you show that they're in fact committed to each other, and they're so devoted to their daughter, and wow, they are just like us in so many ways, and look at the way that their family, who I identify with, accepts them, and you give voice to the doubt in their heads, and that might be the Ed O'Neill character, for example, in our show. You find a way to wrap your arms around them, and they find a way to wrap their arms around you. And so, again, I think that something that you've always done so well, and you've said so eloquently before, you can't lead with a message. If you're leading with a message, no one will watch. Mm-hmm. It's got to be comedy first, always. Or in our case here, comedy first. That gets people to watch, and then if you're going to say something,
it's an intravenous.
Yeah, let it sneak in under the door. You get to pick. How about one more?
Oh, there's a lady over there.
Oh, thank you. An honor. Fernfield Brooks is a good friend of ours. She sends her regards, sir. This is sort of to both of you. I saw an interview with some of your staff, Mr. Levitan, about how in writing you sometimes take on, sometimes the characters come out as yourselves. And so for both of you, in some of the characters that, like in Modern Family, who do you most relate to?
Well, it's funny, we recently went to Australia, and while we were in an airport waiting for our plane, the cast and much of the crew, everybody's on their phones. This thing came across BuzzFeed, which Modern Family character are you? And so we all started taking it, and none of the actors were their own character, and I was Claire. Which character of yours did you relate to the most?
Maud.
Maud. Good one. All right, everybody. I guess our time is up. My sincere appreciation to Norman Lear.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.